She kissed him and got on the train. What? What? No. What? She didn't. Like, duh, of course she did. It's Meli. What else did you expect? Like, what did you think she was gonna do? That's exactly what she'd do. Hi guys, welcome to the first chapter of the Castor Saga. Chapter 1, The Long Black Train. Anthony Young was sitting outside the train station with his father. Victor Young was a pastor who was there to bless the long black train before it left the station that evening. Anthony had come along to watch, playing his old beat-up guitar for people as they passed by, and occasionally pausing to collect the tips they gave him. Anthony and his father didn't get along very well, which was expected. Victor was annoyed with his son collecting tips from people rather than doing something useful with his life, but Anthony was 20 years old and had his own ideas about what his life should look like. Victor was a devoted Christian pastor, but Anthony wanted to live a simple, happy, carefree life. He listened to his father's sermons when he was young about God and heaven, but Anthony's mother, Angelica, wasn't a Christian, and wanted Victor to teach Anthony a variety. Victor tried his best, but old dogs don't learn new tricks. Not easily, that is. Anthony wanted to be a musician. His skills exceeded most musicians he had met at church events and back in high school, but he was just as happy playing at the train station as he would be in front of a full stadium. Victor was from California, but Anthony's mother was from Central Oregon and persuaded Victor to move when Anthony was born. Anthony didn't know much about his mother. She had left them shortly after he was born, but Anthony had a feeling they'd be together again one day. You'd think he'd resent her for leaving, but his father always spoke kindly about his mother, and from what he heard, he knew if she left, then it must have been for a good reason. Anthony enjoyed his childhood in Oregon, but as he grew up, he inherited his father's city boy style. He often wore a black leather or blue jacket, with black jeans, as sneakers, and a blue t-shirt. Today he just had his blue sweater on since it wasn't too cold. Anthony liked all kinds of music. He played his guitar and sang many different songs, but his father told him that while they were there, he needed to keep his music quieter and less rock and roll. Anthony thought this was kind of funny, but he did as his father asked to be respectful. The last train had left the station as it got dark, and no one was in sight except for Anthony and Victor. Anthony was confused and looked to his father for answers, as to which train he was there to bless. "Father, I thought you were supposed to bless the last train to leave the station. The last train just left." "Open your eyes, son, and look down there." Victor pointed to the left as a long black train with no lights on pulled up to the station. It was darker than the night itself, and the creaking sound it made on the tracks made Anthony shiver. Victor hadn't had a fire in his eyes like this one since Anthony was a child, and his son didn't understand it. Why doesn't the train have its lights on? "Shh, quiet, boy. The train is a secret. It's on its way to hell." Anthony rolled his eyes and gave his father a sardonic look. To hell? Really? Anthony's sarcasm angered his father, who was already a pretty grouchy man to begin with. He came towards Anthony looking entirely annoyed and pointed at him in a disciplinary way. He spoke with a stern voice that Anthony had only heard on the most serious of occasions. "You best be minding your manners. I am your father, and you should be taking what I say seriously. Especially about this train. It's the devil's work." Anthony rolled his eyes again, a bit more subtly this time, and leaned back against the bench he was sitting on, as his father paced back and forth nervously. Anthony respected his father plenty, but he didn't take him too seriously these days. He looked up at Victor and mumbled quietly under his breath. "Yes, sir, drill sergeant." Just as Victor turned around looking at Anthony, they heard some incredibly bizarre voices coming from the right side of the station. They were whispered voices, and sounded almost mournful in nature. The train station itself was an older building, but had been rebuilt a little when it started falling apart. It was a wide area, with many sets of tracks, but one set of tracks in particular looked older, as if the train hadn't run on them in years. They glanced to the side and saw some suspicious-looking people walking towards them. All 40 or so of the people walking up were young, around Anthony's age. Some of them looked younger, but a few looked older. Some of them looked pretty strange, but Anthony had always been open-minded to meeting new people, and any conversation at all would beat sitting there bored at this point. Anthony stood as they walked over, and the train came to a halt. He was a curious person, and extremely friendly when he wanted to be, so he decided to see if anyone would tell him about the train. Victor started preaching his speech and doing his blessing of the train, and Anthony started walking around talking to people. Well, trying to talk to people. Most of those he tried to talk to seemed to ignore him. He paused by one young man who turned away from him looking annoyed and slightly frightened. He tried to talk to a young lady, but she wouldn't talk to him either. They didn't even acknowledge his existence. In fact, they all seemed to be slightly scared of him. Finally, he gave up on the small talk and just stood there using his guitar as a rest as he leaned forward on it with his forearms and looked at the crowd. As he looked over them, one young woman came up behind him. Her name was Melissa. They won't talk to you because you're different. You scare them. Excuse me? Anthony turned around and looked at the girl confused. She had shoulder-length, medium brown hair that looked wavy and swayed side to side like the wind in the trees. Her bright blue eyes seemed to glow in the dim lights of the train station, and she stared up at him with a look of curiosity and mischievousness. She wore black clothing that covered most of her body, but her shirt was fairly low-cut, and her long sleeves had thumb holes cut in the wrists. A medium-sized brown bag hung at her side, and she stood with her hands held together in front of her. Anthony had black hair like his father, that was fashioned into curtain-styled bangs that you would have seen more commonly in the 90s. He had deep blue, kind-looking eyes, and was 6'3" in height. This girl was shorter than him by quite a bit, and stood beside him at about 5'9". They both had similar pale-colored skin, and it was somehow obvious that they were both from Oregon. It was splattered across their faces. Most born and raised Oregonians will smile and say hi to just about anyone, especially if they're from Benedict. So this gave Anthony a small glimmer of hope as Melissa spoke to him. Anthony smiled down at her in an attempt to be kind. Those people, the ones you were trying to talk to, they are different. They're not normal. They think you are normal. I wouldn't consider myself normal. You're more normal than we are. Really? Is that so? So then you're one of them? Yes and no. What do you mean? Well, we are the strange and unusual children. The black sheep, the ugly ducklings, the outcasts. From the looks of you, I'd say you probably fit into that category as well. Anthony leaned against his guitar, balancing on his forearms again, as he smirked at her in an attempt to be charming. If I remember correctly, the ugly duckling turned out to be a swan. Yes, but that didn't matter to the other ducks. The swan was only happy when it found others like itself. That is why they will not talk to you, sir. They believe you are indeed not a swan. You are a duck. Anthony didn't know if he should be offended by that or laugh. He kind of chuckled and bowed his head, then looked back up at her. You're a strange one, that's for sure. But you don't know me. How can you tell if I'm a swan or not? Oh, it doesn't matter to me that you're not a swan. In fact, you very well could be and instead just look like a duck. Really? So you don't care if I'm a duck and you're a swan? Melissa faintly smiled. A shimmer of mischief caught her eyes, and she stood looking up at the train. She glanced his way sweetly, but watched him with a vaguely sinister grin. I'm talking to you, aren't I? Anthony smiled and looked up at the train where Melissa had refocused her attention, but then glanced back at her. My name is Anthony. You can call me Tony. Will you tell me your name? A rose by any other name is just as sweet, isn't it? Shakespeare. Romeo and Juliet, I believe. Beautiful and appropriate, but I'd still like to know your name. Melissa. My name is Melissa. You can call me whatever you'd like. Melissa. A beautiful name indeed. Melissa scoffed and looked at him with a similar sardonic smile that seemed to mimic the one Tony had given his father earlier, almost as if she had been there to see it. Thanks. It means honeybee, so you better watch yourself. I sting. Well, hopefully you won't have to. I'm not entirely sure what my name means. It means praiseworthy, a name fit for a king. But forgive me for not bowing, Your Highness. I do not bow to just any duck. That's perfectly fine. I don't expect you to. Is Meli okay? Melissa smirked with a slightly surprised grin lining her perfectly pink lips. She didn't have any makeup on. Her beauty was natural, but the sweet smile she wore made it seem as if she'd heard that name before. She knew exactly what he was saying, but she didn't want him to know that. Who is Meli? Tony laughed again, then grinned back at her. No, I mean, is it cool if I call you Meli? Melissa's smile turned softer when he said that. She rolled her eyes and looked up at him, crossing her arms. She knew he was flirting with her, but she didn't mind it. Oh, it's very cool, Tony. Good. So, you're getting on the train, yes? Are you around my age? How old are you? I'm 20. You? I'm 18. I thought you looked about that. Would you like to sit down and talk a while? The pastor's blessings often take some time. Sure, that sounds nice. Meli sat with Tony over on the bench he was sitting on earlier, and he strummed his guitar, playing little melodies as they talked. Victor continued his blessing, paying no attention to his son or the mysterious girl sitting with him. You're a wonderful musician. I play a little myself, too, but not as well as you do. Thanks. What kind of music do you like? I like it all. I have a wide variety on my playlist, so what about you? Same. I like a lot of stuff, older stuff, and newer stuff, you know. No, actually, I don't. Well, like, the old 80s hits compared to, like, today's top 40. I like just about everything. Oh, yes, I do know then. Tony chuckled and played a different melody, slightly showing off a bit. He didn't admit to himself that he wanted to impress her, but he hoped she'd find him entertaining at least. This girl was strangely charming herself, and she giggled watching Tony as he played. It was obvious she wasn't very impressed, but she seemed to enjoy his music nonetheless. Tony glanced up on occasion to see how far along his father's blessing was. Then he'd look back at Meli, enjoying her company. So, do you know where that train is going? I do. It's going to the Garden of Lily up by New Bay. Tony paused a moment when she said that. Really? That sounds like quite a long way to go by train. Why not just drive by car? It would save you money on a train ticket and be faster. Because you can't get to the Garden of Lily by car. There are no roads. Besides, where's your sense of adventure? Everyone drives a car these days. It's not every day you get to ride a beautiful train like this one. Oh, yeah? Yes. Tony looked around at everyone, then looked back at her. He was still plucking away at his guitar strings and only paused to look around or talk to Meli. He found her mannerisms strange, but her spirit was fascinating for someone so young. So, Meli, most of the other people have some form of luggage, but I see you just got your purse there. Did you check a bag already? No. Most of the people with luggage here probably don't understand what they're doing or aren't meant to be here. I only brought this. This is all I'll need. They likely won't be allowed to board, but I will. I see. So not just anyone can get on the train then? You can't just buy a ticket? Nope. I'm getting on, though. The conductor yelled out as Victor finished his blessing. All aboard! Tony stood up as she did and followed her over towards the line where people were getting boarded onto the train or being turned away. I guess I'll, see you around, maybe? Wait, you're not getting on the train? No, I'm not. Tony had a somber expression, almost wishing he could go too. Why are you here then if you're not coming? My father's the one who blesses the train. I just came to watch, but it was much nicer talking to you. Oh, that's too bad, Tony. I actually thought you were a Castor yourself and you were coming too. Oh well. I doubt I'll get to see you again, so, Meli leaned over and kissed Tony's cheek gently. He was so surprised by it, he completely forgot what she'd said before, and touched his cheek as she leaned away. Victor was oblivious to Meli and Tony and was trying to save people from riding the train, so he didn't see their little moment. Goodbye, Tony. Tony stood there frozen, unable to move as she nodded and turned away, walking over to the conductor. He saw Meli pull up the sleeve on her arm as she showed the conductor the underside of her lower arm. Tony watched the conductor take out what appeared to be a stamp with red ink on it of some sort. The conductor pushed the stamp into Meli's arm just as he had several other passengers. Meli flinched and grabbed onto the step handle of the train. The conductor removed the stamp from her arm, and she rolled her sleeve back down. Then the conductor led her on. Tony watched as others tried to get on the train. Anyone who refused to get the stamp on their arm was rejected. And Meli had been right. Most of those people had luggage with them. A few more passengers got on, then another few were turned away. Tony saw Meli sit on the left side of the train by the window, but she couldn't see him because she was on the opposite side that looked away from the station. Victor walked up and put a hand on his son's shoulder. These poor doomed souls. I tried to save them, but I guess the damned can't always be saved. Could you not? Tony brushed Victor's hand off his shoulder and looked at him with fury in his eyes. I met one girl who just got on the train, and she seemed much too nice to be going anywhere but heaven. This train doesn't go to hell, Father. That I'm sure of. Victor looked at his son, astounded that he'd burst out in anger like that. Boy, what's gotten into you? I just can't imagine the girl I met ever doing anything wrong. She was too kind, too funny. I just don't think she could go to hell. Tony's demeanor changed as he calmed down a little. He didn't burst out often, but Victor really hit a nerve with that comment. And then he did it again. Then she was obviously either a liar or a whore. How dare you judge someone you don't even know, and why? Just because they're different? Melissa was right. No wonder none of them would talk to me. They must have thought I was like you, but I'm not. I know she was good. She was sweet. You're wrong, Father. If you're so sure she's pure and I'm wrong, why don't you just go on and join them? Do you want to go to hell? Victor was enraged with Anthony's accusations and lost his temper in the moment. It was almost as if Victor were making it up as he went, as if he knew the train didn't go to hell, but he was trying his best to convince his son that it did. I have tried to bring you up right and make a respectable, God-fearing man out of you, but all you want to do is play your damn music, read your dumb books, and hang out at this damn train station. Your mother left because she decided to go find herself, and I've tried to protect you from that your entire life. But no more, Anthony. She was one of them. I tried to save her too, but I couldn't. She left us, and now you're following in her footsteps. You're acting just like your mother, and I've had enough of it. Tony looked at the train as it began to move away from the station. Tony lifted his guitar over his shoulder and thought for a moment, then looked at his father with a somewhat sad smile. How dare you talk about my mother like that? If I'm so much like her, then maybe it's about time I go join her. Anthony, I love you, Father, but you need to practice more of that unconditional love that you always preach. Tony ran over towards the bench he'd been sitting on earlier and grabbed the bag that was sitting in his guitar case. He slammed the guitar into the case, then took his bag and guitar case and ran towards the train as it rushed away from the station down the tracks. Anthony, don't you do it! Tony saw some tall, dark-haired young men on the back of the train who had jumped on last minute like he was about to. He almost stopped to question what the hell he was doing, but when he saw he was running out of platform, he threw his bag onto the back of the train. The other stowaways grabbed his guitar case and bag from him. Then he jumped on the back of the train, being pulled over the railings by the other stowaways. Tony waved to his father, saying goodbye for what would be the last time. Victor stood there in shock. He wasn't entirely sure what had just happened. As soon as they couldn't see the station, Tony turned around to thank the mysterious men who had just helped him, but they were gone, as if they'd never been there. Tony held his guitar case at his side and hung his bag on the neck of the case. He walked up through the car slowly, looking around the train. It may have been black as night outside, but inside, it was beautiful. It looked like a queen had been personally escorted in this very train car. Golden seats with maroon red curtains and carpet. These cars were for long-distance travel, and they looked lovely. Tony entered another car, and many people looked back at him from their seats. Meli was sitting on the left side, in the middle, and she smiled when she recognized him. "Tony! You made it!" She motioned him over to her, and he sat in the seat facing her. "I'm glad you decided to come." "Yeah, it was kind of last minute." The conductor walked over to him, looking very unhappy. The conductor was shorter than Tony, about 5'11", with brown hair and brown eyes. He was a stern man who liked when the rules of his train were followed and respected. But he was rather silly when you got to know him. "Sir, you can't just hop on this train whenever you feel like it. Do you have a ticket?" "No, but I have some money if you'd like me to pay for one." "That's not how this works, young man." "Well, how does it work then?" No one said a word, and Tony was worried for a minute. Tony looked over at Mel, and she began to roll up her sleeve. "You have to be able to read the words on the tickets, Tony. Here, you can borrow mine." Meli rolled up her sleeve and showed him her arm where she had been stamped. Only now he realized that it wasn't a stamp. She had a ticket mark burned into her lower arm. The writing was also very strange. It was like someone took English letters and turned them upside down, sideways, and inside out, but Tony wasn't looking at the writing at the moment. He was more concerned that the conductor had branded the ticket into Meli's arm. "Oh, my God, I don't understand. The ticket, your arm is burned." Meli came over and sat beside him, grabbing onto his right arm. "That's how it goes, Tony. We all have the burn. You have to offer up a bit of your flesh to the train in order for the train to run. Otherwise, you won't make it through the gates. That's insane! What kind of train is this? It's a very special train, Tony. I know it sounds twisted, but trust me, it's worth it. Ugh! Is it now? Come on already, read the words on her arm. If you can read the words, then we'll give you a mark like hers, and you'll be permitted to ride on the train. If you can't read them, well... Meli spoke a bit louder at the conductor, but when she looked at Tony, she seemed worried. He can do it! Just give him a second to try. Meli touched Tony's arm and whispered to him quietly. Tony, please. You have to do it. They'll throw you off the train if you don't. They won't even slow down. Please, just try. Tony was scared. What had he gotten himself into? He looked again at the ticket on her arm, and suddenly the strange writing transformed in front of his eyes. Blessed be... Is that what it says? Blessed be? I don't know. Is it? You tell me. Yes, it is. It says, blessed be the train tracks to the sea. Well then. The conductor looked at Meli, then back to Tony with a glare. I guess if he can read it, we can't deny him passage on the train. But he needs the mark first. Roll up your sleeve, boy. Tony looked at Meli, who nodded nervously. She took his hand gently and reached over, touching his sleeve. But the conductor slapped her hand away. Ouch! Hey! Don't you touch her! It has to be you who rolls the sleeve up, sir. Offer your flesh, otherwise the train will not be satisfied. Tony touched Meli's hand gently, and she let go of his arm as he rolled his sleeve up and laid his arm on the armrest of his seat. The conductor very quickly pulled out his ticket branding iron and pushed it against Tony's exposed arm. Ouch! The hell? Tony went to take a swing at the conductor, but Meli grabbed his arm, holding him back. Don't, Tony! The conductor removed the iron, and Tony saw the red-hot mark on his arm. The conductor stepped back with a satisfied look. Welcome aboard, Mr. Tony was breathing heavier now and tried to speak and ignore the pain. Young. Anthony Young, sir. The conductor nodded and walked away, concealing a smile. He was slightly amused that Tony had ignored Victor and hopped on the train anyway, but he was also amused that he'd gotten to burn the preacher's brat. Meli sat back on the seat as Tony laid his head back against the headrest. She sat beside him quietly. She seemed less nervous now, and it almost seemed as if she were happy. So, what changed your mind? Well, my mother left us when I was born. I've always thought I might see her again someday. My father used to tell me that she hopped on the train to hell and never looked back. Oh, and so I'm thinking maybe I'll find her at the end of this ride. He called this the train to hell, but I have no idea why he called it that. Meli bowed her head for a moment, but glanced up at him as her lips curled up on one side. I've got a certain set of wisdoms I like to go by. I called them my rules of life. Tony raised an eyebrow, having not a clue what relevance that statement had to their conversation, but he humored her out of curiosity. Oh? Rule number 1. Never muddy the truth. If you're going to lie, either lie entirely or not at all. Otherwise, you risk confusing yourself. Our brains can't tell the difference sometimes if we tell ourselves something often enough. Maybe that was your dad's way of dealing with the pain of your mom leaving you. I know you were a baby when she left, but it couldn't have been easy for him either. Yeah, I know. And I know it sounds pretty silly to think I'll find her, but I just wanted something different and new. A change of scenery, but now I'm thinking I've made a huge mistake. It's not silly at all, Tony. If your mother was fairly young, she could have hopped on the last train. The train only runs every 20 years, so you're 20 now. It would make sense. Besides, it wasn't a mistake, Tony. I'm happy you decided to come. I wonder sometimes why she left. Well, it's always been my dream to ride this train to the end. Like I said before, I'm here for adventure. Maybe it was her dream too. I'm sure it was hard for her to leave you behind. Yeah, probably. It was awkward for Tony to talk about his mom, and he didn't know what else to say after what just happened. Tony got quiet, and Meli could tell he needed his space, so Meli moved away from him and laid down on her seat across from him to rest her head on her little brown bag. Well, I'm glad you're here, Tony. I hope you find what you're looking for. Thanks. I hope so too, Meli. Night. Night. Tony laid his guitar case down on the floor against his seat and rested his eyes, leaning his head back against the headrest. His arm was burning, and he stared at the ceiling a while, noticing the roof was glass and he could see the stars. He stared at them for the longest time as he drifted in and out of sleep. When Tony was asleep, all he could dream about was finding his mother. He didn't remember her from before she left. He was just an infant at the time, but he'd seen pictures of her. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and blue eyes. Tony thought he had her eyes, and every time he looked in a mirror, he thought of her. Tony was a little worried. He didn't regret his decision to get on the train, but he knew his father would never understand why he did it. He had a restless night until morning, unable to get comfortable or shut down his brain, but the thought of finding his mother numbed the pain in his arm. He watched Meli sleep for a while, then looked out the window watching the trees fly by them. Tony saw they were passing a large blue lake and pulled out his phone to take a picture. As soon as he did, he felt an electric shock, making him drop the phone on the seat beside him. Ouch! What the... Suddenly the conductor appeared and picked the phone up off the seat. No phones on the train, boy. Where we're going, there isn't any cell service anyways. The conductor walked away with the phone in his hand. He was grinning quite smugly. This wasn't the first phone he'd confiscated. Tony pulled out his earbuds from his bag and plugged them into an old digital music player he kept his music on. He dozed off finally to the music, but when morning came, even his old music player couldn't tune out the noise. And that's chapter 1. I hope you guys were entertained, and I hope you will stick around for chapter 2, because this is just heating up if you've made it to this far. We got a lot of interesting stuff that's about to happen to Tony and Meli. If you haven't already, subscribe below, stick around, listen to the rest of the story. Chapter 2 is on its way. I shall be recording that one very soon for you. That being said, thank you very much for watching. Love you very much. See you later.